But firstly, thank you, mate. Can you introduce yourself and explain to us a little bit why you chose to engage Sharp Property Buyers to help with your investment journey?
I'm Damian Rutherford. I'm a local sales agent here on the Central Coast, father of a beautiful daughter Zoe and my partner Tahlea. And so, I'd call us just that everyday, maybe mum and dad investor that you hear about and see about. We wanted to try and set ourselves up for the future and not have to rely on, government and pensions and things like that. And working in property industry, I felt like it was a good avenue to kind of go down in terms of something that was a little bit more steady. I would maybe call myself conservative in my approach in terms of investing. And so to me, I like the property space given its, longer time frame, longer term, and just that steadiness. But equally, I like the leverage side of things to it. So you might ask, like, why would you, of all people, kind of trust someone else to look after it? And it really just came down to expertise. For me, I know the area here. I know streets and suburbs and prices, and I know demographics, and I have good relationships. I know different people or who to speak to, or if I need to find out information, where to go. I didn't know any of that in where we purchased. And I don't know if you're comfortable sharing where we did, but that's what to me was so valuable. You were already on the ground. You had the relationships with local sales agents. You had a good understanding of market knowledge, of prices, of even just down to the nitty gritty of different streets and pockets of maybe where to avoid, where to try and buy. And so that's what we really liked about, working with the team.
Yeah, awesome, mate. And I want to go back to one of the things that you mentioned. So you're obviously a very successful sales agent here on the Central Coast, something that you and I have spoken about in the past, but something that I'm very surprised by is how little sales agents will invest in property and think that that's a solid wealth vehicle. Not many sales agents out there own properties. Do you know why? What do you think the reason is?
We've spoken about this a couple of times. I don't know what the answer is. To me, I think, if anything, you would anticipate most sales agents to working in this space would have a bit of that understanding. But our industry, as you probably well know, is very, turbulent, or you can ride that little bit of a roller coaster of having the good times with the bad. And so I think that's how a lot of real estate agents' mindsets maybe operate. It's kind of, they don't think as maybe as long-term as others. That's maybe what I can put it down to.
Yeah, I think because, we've helped a lot of sales agents, and I'm always very curious around that, why not many kind of, decide to build out a portfolio. I think sometimes as well, like, they're always having those conversations around selling and probably all of the benefits to selling a property, right? And I know you've also said, I hope you don't mind me saying, but I know you've actually sat down in someone's lounge room and said, you know what, I wouldn't be selling this. This isn't a good option for you, even though that's against, obviously your best interest, because you get paid when you engage a client or engage a vendor and then sell their home. And you've sat there and said, look, I think you're actually better off to hold the property. But I feel like with a lot of sales agents, because they're just constantly seeing the benefits of the sale, they really just don't have that long-term perspective, or even almost like the peripheral vision that you need to obviously have that investor mindset.
I think you're right. I've probably talked myself out of a handful of sales over the years of, nearly deterring people to pop their place on the market. And to me, when it comes to, selling, I try and look at, okay, if I was in their shoes, what would I do, or what's going to be best for them longer term? And so that, the leverage of property, we had a rate drop yesterday, market trends, typically the longer you hold, the property's, pretty steady vehicle of growth. And so if someone can afford to do it and it makes sense for them to be able to do it, and there's no kind of, underlying reason why they need to sell, then I'm often telling them not to, because in 3 or 4 or 5 years time, that $1 million property could be 1.1 or could be 1.2. And it just works out better for them down the line. But, getting back to the whole real estate agent mindset, it can be very much of, well, I haven't sold something for a little while. I need to really try and get this person motivated to get it on the market. And yeah, to your point, maybe that's where, because we're often having these conversations of, I've got a buyer, or let's get you on the market, let's get you sold. And, no one knows what's around the corner, because no one does have that crystal ball. It is very much of maybe that somewhat scarcity mindset of, not wanting to do it themselves.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And you touched on, local knowledge, and how important that is, and expertise, whether that be, as a local buyer's agent specialist or an owner-occupier buyer's agent or even a local selling agent. The expertise are critical, and I feel like the difference between the skill set as being a local buyer's agent, helping people buy their family home as opposed to, being an investment advisor are just two completely different things, which obviously you identified when you were looking to engage us. How did you feel comfortable and what made you feel comfortable with us and our recommendations?
I knew that you'd been on the ground. Like, I knew that you'd been there. You'd had the conversations with the agents. You knew what properties were selling for. You knew where offers were on other properties. Like I said, you knew the different streets and areas, and you really pinpointed not just particular suburbs we should look for, but the particular streets within those particular suburbs. And so for me, I'm quite detailed or analytical when it comes to my work or just my mindset. And so you'd already done all that for me.
Nice.
You'd already kind of answered all of those questions. And so we actually purchased the first home that you presented us, and it was like an off market, and it was like week one of basically, signing up. And I remember you saying like, hey, I'm going to pitch you this property. I know it's super early, and we just went for it. I think I like that you helped us not be in that procrastination of, some people you see look for 3, 4, 5 months in my line of work. And then all of a sudden they go, we should have bought that first one. Or, gee, if I'd have bought that first one and now the market's gone up, I would have paid $10,000 or $20,000 less. And so, we were confident, Tahlea and I were confident in knowing that you weren't going to send me something that you didn't think was a good opportunity. And if the numbers made sense and, in the investment side of things, trying to be unemotional about the decision, we got it for a fair price. And the last we just spoke about before coming on here, like the last 3 years have done really well for us. So we love it. We're super stoked with the outcome.
That's awesome. And look, I would say something that stands out for us over the hundreds of clients that we've helped and the years and years that we've been doing this is the people that don't hesitate, like they typically do really well. And it's really hard for us to present the first property to someone and say, hey, this is a good opportunity. All right. It's very similar probably with you when you're sitting down with a vendor and you've got a really good offer for the home. And in no way, do we, push our clients into deals or into properties if they don't feel comfortable. But sharing that first property, especially when it's a good opportunity, you kind of need to say, hey, there may be more, but there may not be. All right. And we think that this is really aligned with what it is that you want to do. But the people that go, yep, let's move on it, they always seem to do really well. I mean, I can think of a couple of clients that have bought 3 and 4 properties with us, haven't hesitated at all, and their portfolios are absolutely pumping. And I could probably name dozens that have kind of procrastinated a little bit, and have sat there and gone, man, we really should have bought that first property, especially in areas like where your property is, where that market is just moving so quickly. Like you could nearly say, $5,000 to $10,000 a week there at some stages. That market was moving that quickly. So if you're sitting in a market not buying and maybe passing on properties, in 3 months, in a period of 3 months, that market could have moved up 10%, and you're readjusting your budget and readjusting your expectations. But mate, it's good. I applaud you for taking the plunge on that first property and having some trust in us as well.
Yeah. Look, it's almost like the same conversation I have with a lot of my sellers, but on the flip side, right? That old saying of, oftentimes your first offer is your best offer for a seller is true. And the reason being is that these buyers that are offering, your week 1, week 2, they've usually missed out on 2 or 3 or 4 properties prior, and they're just like ready to try and secure something. From a selling agent, you kind of really have a good sense of, okay, this buyer, they're just ready to get it done. And I know that they're probably going to be willing to pay another 10 or 20,000 more than maybe what the home fair market price is, just because they're sick of going to these, open homes. They're sick of the constant travel and the negotiating, the back and forth. They just want it done. And almost like the flip side with buyer's side of things, exactly right. Like in that market, like you said, where it was moving at the time. And I think, there'd been quite significant growth in the 2 to 3 years prior to us buying, and it's just kind of continued on. It's spot on. If we had have waited for the next opportunity, what we paid for it, we might have been paying an extra 10 or 20 or 30 or like we're speaking about now, like there's been near on 30% growth in the last 3 years. Like imagine if we waited 6 months, what would that have looked like?
Obviously, you're very vigilant with your approach when you're selling properties. And even when we went through the purchase, we went through all the comparable sales. You've got access to a lot of the different platforms that we have as well. After we sort of secured the property for you, it was an off-market purchase. Did you feel supported? I mean, you're obviously always on that selling side. What was your experience like? Were there any obvious differences between the two sides, or what your experience was like working with us through that processing period once we'd exchanged?
I actually took a lot of lessons and takeaways of what yourself and the team do and try to implement it into my business. So I think communication was just outstanding. It was everyone, not just myself and Tahlea, were kept up to date, but it was the solicitors and conveyancers, our mortgage broker, the agent on the other end. There was really like no stone left unturned. And it was never a question of, oh, what happens now? It was like, hey, these are the next 3 steps that we're kind of working towards or going through, and we'll just take care of all of it for you. Getting back to selling here on the Central Coast, well, we purchase interstate, and there's different rules and legislations, and I would hope to think that I'm quite a good negotiator and have a really good understanding of psychology and people's demographic and things like that. But what I didn't know was there was just different ways of doing things interstate. I hear, for example, when you get a pest and building inspection back, it's kind of like, well, it is what it is, and you're taking that property, so to speak, as is. Well, up there, you said, oh, we'll just get them to fix all those things. And I was like, oh, what? Can we get them to do that? Is that actual thing? And there was a whole bunch of different clauses or things that you negotiated on our behalf that just wouldn't fly here in New South Wales, that I was like, oh, how good is this? It really worked in our favor. I would have just gone into it with the approach of how I would, buy and sell a property here.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that was just invaluable.
And that again comes down to kind of that expertise, right? And the local expertise. Now, we're buying in multiple states across the country, and every single state is different, right? Their cooling off periods are different. Their deposit amounts are different. In some cases, even region to region, what's expected as a deposit is different, right? So it's about knowing all of that. Yeah, with building and pests reports and any maintenance items that pop up, again, depending on the state, you may have some ability there to negotiate with the vendor addressing some of those items for you. And of course, we'll always go into bat for our clients, if we can, and we'll take some punches along the way from the sales agent as well. But they're very, very different. I mean, deposit amounts are different, here in New South Wales, you're talking typical deposit of 5 to 10% of the purchase price. Queensland, as an example, the deposit can be as small as 5,000. Really, Victoria's also more aligned with New South Wales, somewhere between 5 and 10% as well. You mentioned the communication, and look, I've got to be honest. I'm big on communication, but Jade is the one that really implements all of those systems. Right, she's unbelievable, and also Renee as well, who works with us. Recently, we did a step by step in terms of how many touch points or how many action items need to happen from when we exchange on the property. So we've secured it, contracts have exchanged, to settlement, and there's 38 steps along the way. I can't take any credit for outlining those steps, but both Jade and Renee are just so onto it, and they just know exactly what's coming up and what's required. And as the advisor, to make sure that your journey and your experience is as seamless as possible, right? And we want to make sure that we're avoiding any kind of pitfalls or roadblocks or potholes along the way, right? And sometimes, the client won't even know they're happening, right? Because we've already kind of smoothed it over before it's even eventuated. But I'm glad we've had a bit of a rub off on your internal processes, mate. That makes me feel good.
Yeah, honestly, I already thought I was pretty well onto it and keeping people up to date. But, I think from anything, there's always something to learn. And 38 touch points, like you mentioned about, that's just from exchange. So you got to think about all the pre-work going into it that you do as well, of the, relationship building and the keeping up to date with comparable properties or sales, or being on the ground, or having an understanding of, like we said, the local market knowledge. I think there's so many things that people maybe don't see that a buyer's agent does behind the scenes that is so valuable to clients. Not only are they helping you secure a property in a market that they know, or have a solid understanding of knowing that we're going to see some potential growth here, but they take away all those little minor legwork details that you just wouldn't know about. And I'm probably fortunate that I do know maybe a little bit more than most, so I kind of knew what was coming or knew what to anticipate. But it was even before I'd thought, oh, this is the next step, it'd already been taken care of. That kind of proactivity is really something now. It's okay, this is what we've just completed, or this is what we've just accomplished, or we've just exchanged, and now this is the next step for us. And like we spoke about, it's the, we're getting them to fix those things that came up on the building report, or, your conveyancer's doing this, or your broker's doing that. It was just everyone was just constantly up to date. It was just,
and that's just through getting the reps in, right? We've done hundreds and hundreds of transactions. We know what's coming. We know what to look out for. We know all the little triggers that are coming. And look, we love obviously working with other people from within the industry, whether it be sales agents, mortgage brokers, financial planners, accountants, because there's a good level of understanding there as to, you know what's sort of coming. It's interesting, you touched on kind of what a buyer's agent does and their role outside of the actual transaction. You know, like when we're buying family homes for people, you know, we're understanding what the most appropriate school is, what's important to them from a lifestyle perspective, what proximity they need to amenities and infrastructure, how quickly they can get back to the freeway or train station, public transport. Also, is the beach important to them? Is the lake important to them? Are the mountains important to them? And that's all kind of determined before we've even started. Oh, do you want a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom home?
Yeah.
You know, like it's so much bigger than just the actual transaction itself. And on the investment side of things, you've been through our process, but same again, we're sitting down, we're getting really clear on what your requirements are, what your budget looks like. Are there any yield expectations that we need to follow? What does your risk appetite look like? Do you already hold properties in your portfolio? Because we need to consider them if we're looking at our next purchase. How long do you plan on holding this property for? What does your life look like at the moment? You know, you just mentioned you had a young daughter recently. So we need to consider all of that stuff before we've even hit go on our strategy and on our search, right? So that's outside of, oh, here's a good property for you, let me negotiate it. And then we run through our 38 steps. It's so much broader than that. With us recommending locations for you, what made you feel comfortable?
I think it was so detailed. So like you said, you know, you sit down and you go through, it's not a one size fits all approach. You really tailored it to myself and Tahlea about, you know, what our future plans are, like you just said. And so we felt really comfortable with, like, you know, you pitched us multiple areas across Australia and said, look, these are, you know, essentially 3 areas that I felt we feel like suits your criteria, your circumstance, and this is why we feel like these 3 suburbs and or these 3 areas. And not only that, you delve down into what's the demographic like, what employment drivers are there, what infrastructure is coming in. And it was very clear that it wasn't just, oh yeah, we think these suburbs are going to be good for you. It's like these are for your circumstances what we think really suits the best. And then, you know, obviously we decided to go where we did because we felt like it was probably the most stable of the options, you know, presented in terms of we wanting something that was that set and forget, the long-term, you know, approach, the 30 plus years. You know, Warren Buffett always talks about compounding
Interest, compounding growth.
Yeah. And so to us, it was like, that was largely as well. Like if I was just sitting down and doing the research myself, it's like, okay, how many areas in Australia am I going to look at 100 and then try and narrow it down from there? And again, you narrowed it down to 3 and we kind of just pick from those 3. I think sometimes too many options can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And you can always play this what if there's a better opportunity or a better area, but we felt incredibly comfortable because all the research was done, and it wasn't like this little 1-page handout. It was like you'd really detailed down to the nitty gritty of why you felt it worked for us.
Yeah.
And that's where we were confident.
And I guess we get a lot of positive feedback on our reports that we provide for our clients, right? And I think the majority of investors, novice investors, get it wrong because they think, I want to buy an investment property, jump on realestate.com. That's the first thing that they do. Whereas with us, that's literally the last step that we undertake during our researching process, right? We're looking at a variety of different factors, understanding where government, private spending's happening, what states are in a good position financially, where the demographics are shifting, where population growth's happening, are there any new projects happening in certain areas, and then also getting down to a granular level where we're understanding what household income looks like relative to their debt position, and if there's capacity there for that to increase. You know, that would mean their budgets could increase to purchase in and around that area. Also, whether or not there's rental increases along the way. I'm glad you felt comfortable there because those reports for us, you know, I think they're a pivotal piece in our client's journey and their experience. Like, I could go and buy your property tomorrow at a certain price point, but if it's not backed by any kind of research or data, what's the likelihood of that performing? Like, pretty low, right? So for us, we really need to, or we love to hone in on that. And as you can see, you haven't touched your property other than maybe a handful of maintenance items, and it's gone up around 30%, right, in 3 years.
A few little like minor bits and pieces here and there of, like, you know, your ceiling fan or your dishwasher or whatever, which I think, you know, if you're wanting to be an investor, you got to understand that those things come a little bit with the territory. And I think particularly maybe the first like 1 to 2 years, you might find a few of those little teething issues, but yeah, the opportunity that you presented to us was exactly kind of what we asked for. It was just a solid median house price in the area, close to local amenities, like you spoke about, all the infrastructure that's going in there as well. We had a tenant lined up pre-settlement. They moved in like 3 days after settlement. They've been there the whole time. It's just been like incredibly smooth sailing, and I'm hoping, that by sitting here and speaking this out loud, I'm not jinxing it, but everything's been going just, incredibly well.
And I think, look, I'm a property investor as well. I mean, Jackie does a lot of our admin. Actually, when I say a lot, all of our admin when it comes to the properties. I typically just buy them and then pass on all of the administrative tasks. But if you're an investor and you need to understand, if you're a property investor, you need to understand that these maintenance items will come up. You're going to have issues with fans, toilets, taps, vacancy periods. You're going to have maybe tough conversations with your tenants or your property manager. Like, that's all part of it, right? But you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, oh, I want to have, an investment portfolio and basically have no problems. There are going to be some problems that have come along the way, but look, they're palatable. If your property is going up 10% or more year on year, well, you go, well, you know what? That $300 fan isn't really a big deal because my property's just gone up in value $50,000. So I can wear that,
Spot on. And again, it just comes back to like finding the right people around you. Like, super grateful for everything that you've done for us, but then equally it was, okay, well, here, what's next as well is about finding the right property manager. And, obviously we spoke about having the right mortgage broker in place, and there's all these people that you want on your side to be able to help with those things. And you're looking for that experience. And you spoke about, you've done this hundreds of times, all the steps, nothing's new to you, where to go with it. And the same thing, it was, you put us in relationship with a local trusted property manager, and again, working in the space, I know kind of what to look for, and they've been fantastic. It's a very similar process. It's, hey, look, this is coming up. This is what we recommend it before I need to have to think about it. All of those things is about, if you're going down this path, it's understanding that there might be some hurdles, but if you have the right trusted people in your corner, you just let them handle it for you. You don't have to be as hands-on maybe as some people think. You just have to be there to make some decisions at some points in time.
Yeah, it's critical to get the right people around you, right? Like, you need to have good conversations with mortgage brokers, accountants, maybe financial planner, property advisor. And you touched on the property manager. So I just cannot stress enough the value of an experienced property manager when you are a landlord or when you're a property investor, right? Like, the difference between your experience as a landlord, if you have a good property manager compared to a bad property manager, can be like exponential. A good property manager and someone that knows this stuff and is experienced will be able to understand who the right tenant is for your property, right? And what I mean by that is, maybe they've got some strong rental history, right? They've got capacity to afford the rent and possibly the rental increases coming, right? They present well, they've got solid income, these types of things. If you have an inexperienced property manager, maybe they just grab the first application and say, hey, good news, got someone straight in. And then, they're obviously not, they can potentially not be a good fit with regards to a tenant, which then, as a landlord, we've got to sort of work through a lot of the problems there. So if you're chatting with property managers, a couple of things you want to ask them is understand their level of experience, understand who's in their team, find out how many properties each person's responsible for with regards to managing property. So for example, 5 people in our team, we manage 500 properties between the 5 of us. See whether or not they have any expectations when it comes to, one, the landlord and what we're responsible for. Also, how the property is to be presented for those tenants as well, and also understand what their criteria looks like for the tenant application process as well, right? So get a really clear idea of what it looks like holistically for the property manager and what their expectations are. And if you see any flaws in it, like if they can't really answer those questions for you directly and confidently, I'd be just continuing to do your research to find out if there's someone else there that's suitable.
It's the same with yourselves. It's about them having the checklists in place of knowing, like, you want someone that's done it hundreds of times, and someone that has that checklist in place of, okay, when this happens, we do this, or now that we're at this stage, this is what's next, or these are the systems in place, or it's about doing the background checks on the tenants, or making sure that, you're not just putting someone in willy-nilly, you're putting someone in there. And like I spoke about, like, I've been fortunate that, I had a tenant move in right after settlement. We didn't have to advertise it. They had leased the property to him previously. They knew that he was a solid a solid candidate. They knew he had good, solid income, who kept the properties, previously very well kept. He's been there for nearly 3 years. Like, we haven't had any vacancies in that time, and we've buffered and budgeted for the event that we do need to. So it's just every year it's kind of like a little win for us because we haven't had to deal with any of these issues. And that's where the property manager has actually been the one that's facilitated all that. They're the one that's made sure that we found that quality tenant. And who knows, if it had gone a different way, maybe we have every 6 or 12 months a new tenant in, and we've got 2 to 3 weeks of downtime, and then there's potential maintenance or cleaners or whatever issues in between. We've just minimized all of that by having someone with those checklists and systems in place.
Yeah, it's critical. And look, there are some subtleties to our research in terms of targeting the right property as well, right? That's going to have that strong demand too. So we want to make sure that there are incredibly low vacancy rates, like certainly well below the national average. We also want to make sure that the properties that we're buying are appealing to that local demographic, in terms of, quiet street, the right makeup of the property, near schools and whatnot that you mentioned. So that increases your tenant pool in terms of your applicants for that property. And then it's about having the right property manager there to filter through those applicants to say, hey, these are the 2 best applicants that we have. Which one do you want to go with?
When you talk about that, I think about any new opportunities that I get to sell here. I go, is it worthwhile calling Matt? No, I know you don't like a main road. So, or I know retaining walls is another big one for you. It's like, I'm not even going to call you because I know it's going to be immediate no. And that's where, again, it's that gave me the confidence in knowing that any of the opportunities that you pitched to me, it's like, you'd already done all that legwork. You'd already made sure that, I'm sure, I know as an agent, I'm making hundreds of phone calls a day, and I'm, referring buyers from, one property to the next to try and help them match up or link them to the right home. So I knew you probably spoke to multiple agents. You'd been presented multiple opportunities, and then you've gone, okay, well, here's 30 that I've been presented by agents, but this is probably, of those 30, the only one that I actually think is well suited for you. And it's about that funnel, that filter process. And like I was saying, like, I know there's times where I'm like, oh, this is a great opportunity of a property I'm selling, and I'll call you about it. I know there's other times where I'm like, oh, I don't know, he's not even going to touch this. I'm not even going to call you.
We've had arguments with sales agents about our higher level of criteria with properties.
Yeah.
Like honestly, we will. And some of those things that you just mentioned, like main roads, retaining walls, whether or not it's really close to a school. When I say close, I mean like backing onto a school. Like, that's sometimes a concern. But we stand by that. It's why we have the business that we have, and why we have people like yourself that, refer us clients and that have good experiences with. In terms of dealing with buyers agents and maybe us and others, like, where do you think our place is in the market? Do you think it's a benefit? Do you think it's a hindrance? What's kind of your view on that?
I think, speaking purely from the sales, like, agent side of things, for me, huge benefit. One of the biggest roles of our job is making sure that, similarly, any offer that I'm presenting to an owner, I want to be confident in knowing that prospective buyer is someone that's solid, someone that I can confidently say to my owner, yes, I feel like this is a good candidate. There are a lot of people that unfortunately still make offers without having spoke to a bank or a broker, or, haven't done any of their due diligence, and as quickly as it comes, it can kind of fizzle out. And so a large part of, on the sales side of things, is working out, okay, well, is this a genuine offer or is it not? And dealing with yourself or any, buyer's agents, what I can confidently say to my owners is, look, all of that vetting that I have to do has already been done. I know that when they're making an offer, it's not just like, oh, let's just throw out an offer on this one and we'll throw out an offer on this one and whatever sticks. It's, they've thought through this. They've spent probably quite a lot of time doing their background research and due diligence, and I can confidently say that this is a solid,
bit more of like a B2B
Yeah.
transaction, right? It's a commercial arrangement or relationship between yourself and the buyer's agents, right?
Yeah. And I think, there's obviously the relationship there that you've probably built with, not just myself, but with a lot of sales agents. And as much as, I think some people can see negotiations as very much an us versus them mentality. And certainly, my job is to get the best outcome for the owner, whether that be, often the best price or the best terms, whether it be settlement timeframes or, cooling offs or things like that. And that us versus them approach maybe doesn't always get the best outcome.
No.
And so having those relationships where, we're actually really trying to work towards a common goal here. You're interested in the property, you're trying to buy the home. I'm obviously trying to sell the home, and my owners want to sell the home. Why does it have to be that us versus them? Because no one leaves feeling like they got to win.
Yeah, mate, I think the art of negotiation is to really understand the motivation behind the vendor and find out what's important to them. Sometimes it's price, sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's certainty, and it can be other things as well. And a major mistake I see a lot of people make is creating friction between themselves and the selling agent. I think your best bet is to be a little bit maybe vulnerable to the selling agent. Say, hey, we've been looking at these 3 properties. We missed out on this one at number 1 Smith Street. Our budget sits around here. We really like this home. What do we need to do to try and buy it? Is there anything important to the vendor? What's their circumstances? Have they bought? Have they found somewhere to move yet? Explain to the agent what your position is as well. Are you financially ready to go? Like you mentioned, if you can be a little bit vulnerable, get curious around what the vendor is, then you can start to piece together, I guess the details around the transaction, and then click in with the agent and then work towards that common goal that you're talking about. If you're like, oh, the property's only worth 990,000 and I'm not doing anything more, and then you walk away there and you tell your partner or your wife, oh, we'd pay 1.1 for that. That's not helping anyone. Like you're better off to try and give a little bit and then learn a little bit along the way and just build that relationship, build that rapport as quick as you can with the agent. And in our position, we've got some really strong agent relationships, but every day we're trying to create new ones as well. There's no way we'd have capacity to have a strong relationship with every single agent that pops up in the area and across the country. It's just impossible. But quite quickly, what we're trying to do is build that rapport and build that relationship, find out the details around the sale and the circumstances, and see whether or not we can marry that up with our client. And of course, always having our client's best interest at heart as well.
From a sales agent side of things, that transparency makes it so much easier to know, is it worthwhile me investing more time into you or is it not? And, working with buyer's agents, it's like, great, I know that this person's genuinely interested because they wouldn't be speaking to me if they weren't. And sometimes, like you said, you might have a property worth 1.1 and someone's talking, 950 or 990 or something like that because, they've read a book and said, lowball first. Well, very quickly, when I've got the other person that's saying, yeah, like we're interested around that 1.1, as much as like my job is I'm very diligent in making sure I triple check and cross my T's and dot my I's, but I could very easily see a lot of sales agents just completely just leaving that person out in the wind because, they're trying to play the game, so to speak. I understand as a buyer, you're trying to get the best outcome, and as a seller, you're trying to get the best outcome, but to your point, asking the right questions, and that's where, the good buyers agents will ask the right questions, and tips for buyers is asking lots of questions. And equally, you'll find that the good selling agents will ask you a lot of questions about your circumstances. Why are you moving? What do you like about this home? And equally for a buyer, it's why the owner's moving. What's their circumstances? And sometimes that'll help you tailor your offer. From a sales agent side of things, that transparency makes it so much easier to know, is it worthwhile me investing more time into you or is it not? And, working with buyer's agents, it's like, great, I know that this person's genuinely interested because they wouldn't be speaking to me if they weren't. And sometimes, like you said, you might have a property worth 1.1 and someone's talking, 950 or 990 or something like that because, they've read a book and said, lowball first. Well, very quickly, when I've got the other person that's saying, yeah, like we're interested around that 1.1, like my job is I'm very diligent in making sure I triple check and cross my T's and dot my I's, but I could very easily see a lot of sales agents just completely just leaving that person out in the wind because, they're trying to play the game, so to speak. I understand as a buyer, you're trying to get the best outcome, and as a seller, you're trying to get the best outcome, but to your point, asking the right questions, and that's where, the good buyers agents will ask the right questions, and tips for buyers is asking lots of questions. And equally, you'll find that the good selling agents will ask you a lot of questions about your circumstances. Why are you moving? What do you like about this home? And equally for a buyer, it's why the owner's moving. What's their circumstances? And sometimes that'll help you tailor your offer. To your point, asking the right questions, and that's where, the good the good buyers agents will ask the right questions, and tips for buyers is asking lots of questions. And equally, you'll find that the good selling agents will ask you a lot of questions about your circumstances. Why are you moving? What do you like about this home? And equally for a buyer, it's why the owner's moving. What's their circumstances, and sometimes that'll help you tailor your offer.
Maybe what they think is achievable. But mate, I appreciate you coming in today, and always love having a chat with you, mate. So thank you.
No, thank you.